Good morning, everyone. This is day 3 of our holiday in Shetland, and we're starting off this morning at the most southern point, Sunborough Head, and that's the Sunborough Head Lighthouse. As you can probably see, we're up in the clouds, or at least the clouds are down near us, and the visibility out to sea is not so good. Of course, the lighthouse in the last clip wasn't the true Sunborough Head lighthouse. It is further on up a steep hill, which we're in the process of climbing up. There's a few information boards on the way up. This indicates that there were a number of brocks in more or less in line with each other, so that they could be used as signalling stations. Before the Vikings arrived from the north, most of the invaders would have been from the south, so Sunborough Head would have been the first of the signalling stations, and they probably signalled to each other from brock to brock by fire. So puffing and panting, we made it to the top of the hill, and this is the true Sunborough Head Lighthouse with its fog signal apparatus. I like to see just mist.
Today you're going to discover one of the most fascinating archaeological sites here in the Shetland Islands, or indeed in the UK. You should now be standing outside the visitor centre, from where you have a good view of the site in front of you. About 100 years ago, all you would have seen from this spot would have been a grassy mound with just one ruin, the tallest building just ahead of you. But that all changed on a stormy night in the late 1800s when fierce winds battered the island. Remains of earlier buildings were exposed, and the landowner of the site, John Bruce, started to dig. He found a number of structures that were later confirmed to be prehistoric. In 1925, he gave the site to the government, who through Historic Scotland still care for it today. Their excavations revealed the whole extent of this site. Today, you're going to take a journey through 4,000 years of human history. We'll be looking at the remains chronologically. All you'll need to do is follow the directions at the end of each stop. Now and again, you'll also have the possibility to access additional information. If you listen to everything, your visit will last about an hour. You can pause a commentary at any time by pressing the right button. It will resume if you press the green button. The volume controls are marked with a loudspeaker symbol. Remember, our stewards are here to help if you have any questions. Before we head off, can I remind you to take care as you go round the site? Please stick to the path and don't walk on the low walls. The turf was laid.
And if you look in here in this house, just below the little cupboard, you can see there's a quern, and that's what they would use, the big stone, the smaller stone, the ground.
Laid to help consolidate the remains, and walking over it erodes it. puts it. Let's now make our way to the first stop. With your back to the visitor centre, take the path that leads to the right. Continue along this path until you get to the information panel about the earliest houses. Press the green button when you're ready to continue. Below you is an excavated area containing some of the oldest remains on the site. These date back some 4,000 years to a time known as the Neolithic period. The stones mark the remains of a house, and if you look at the outlines, you'll get an idea of its dimensions. The house was oval in shape, and as such is similar to other houses of this time found in Shetland. There is a black circular shape roughly in the middle of the space. This was the hearth, the focal point of the house. You'll see this again and again as we go round the site. Life in a prehistoric dwelling here in Shetland and in other parts of Scotland was conducted around the central warmth of the peat fire. Behind the hearth, you may be able to make out a large, roughly rectangular stone lying on the ground, with a smaller, round stone inside. This is a saddle quern. It was used for grinding grain to make bread and gruel. The grain would then have been put in the cavity of the lower stone, and the upper stone would then have been used to grind it to a fine flour. You'll also see more of these as you go round the site. The people who lived here grew grain, kept cattle and sheep, and fished in the sea. If you look to the right towards the edge of this area, you'll see another oval shape that looks a bit like a sandpit. This is what remains of the midden or rubbish heap that would have been located outside the house. A lot of what we know about the diets and lives of prehistoric peoples comes from the analysis of their rubbish. Look closely, and you'll be able to make out fish and animal bones and mussel shells. Shellfish would have been part of the staple diet, as cockles and mussels could be collected in large quantities along the beach. You may want to hear what made the first settlers choose Jarlshof as their new home. Are the remains of another oval-shaped house. This house was probably built and rebuilt several times, and you can see that its structure is slightly more complex than that of the house we just looked at, with additional partitions to create little alcoves. These were probably used as sleeping areas or for storage. We've made a leap in time, but as with so much we'll discover today, the evidence we have is of evolution rather than change. The people who are living at Jarlshof now are the descendants of those who lived in the earlier houses we've seen, and they're building in a very similar way to their ancestors. This continuous occupation also means that houses were often reused for different purposes. Artifacts found on this site suggest that this house was eventually used as a smithy, probably around 800 BC. If you'd like to hear more about this, enter 202.
I'm going this way.
We're not sure whether these rooms were separate houses, or whether they were cellular chambers, all belonging to one house. Whatever the case, they're huddled together, providing maximum protection against the cold and the rain. These dwellings look very much like the houses we've seen so far, and you might have noticed some of the recurring features, like the central hearth. But as we continue, you'll see that new developments were taking place. Something must have prompted the inhabitants of Jarlshof to try out new architectural experiments. Now walk along the path till you come to a room with a black grille on the ground. Press the green button when you're there.
Ouch.
Please be careful and don't fall in that tank. I think that might have been used for salt water in, keeping the fish fresh, and we think that water might have been a well. We don't know, but we've seen that. Because of the different sea levels, it's very difficult to tell.
The black grille covers a well or underground chamber set into the ground of this building. In fact, we're standing in only half a building. The sea, through coastal erosion, has claimed its due. You have to imagine the stone walls continuing around behind you to form a circular structure. Just think how imposing it must have been. Today, these stone walls are almost 2.5 meters high, higher than any walls we've seen so far, but originally they would have been even higher. Around 400 BC, this was a new type of building, and one that's unique to Scotland, a broch. And if you look through one of the openings set into the stone wall, you'll be able to see what it is that distinguishes a broch from the buildings we've seen so far. Brochs have two walls, an inner and an outer wall. Structurally, this is a very efficient way of building. To build up high, a single wall would have to be very thick, using a large amount of material. By using the mutual support two thin walls give each other, brochs could more easily be built to greater heights. Parts of the cells between the walls are visible here. Feel free to walk around and explore these in more detail. We come members of the Bruce family are buried at this family memorial. You may remember from the start of the tour that this site used to belong to this family, and that it was a Bruce who started the excavations here. Bruce family descendants still live nearby. Not far from these gravestones, there are also remains from the Pictish period. The Picts were a northern Scottish people, and by the year 600, Shetland had come within their political orbit. We shouldn't think of them as new settlers, though. The people who lived here in the Pictish period were probably descendants of the former inhabitants. A stone incised with a cross found on the site suggests that at some point they converted to Christianity. We won't be discussing the Pictish remains on our tour, but please feel free to visit them later if you have time. We're going to stop here for a moment and look at the remains visible to the left of the path. We've moved on in time again to around 850 AD, and to a new culture that becomes dominant in Shetland. These houses were not built by the people who lived in the wheelhouses and brochs. The settlement you see here was built by Norse colonisers. Around 850, these Norse settlers, the people often known as Vikings, came to Jarlshof. And they stayed. The settlement you see in front of you was occupied till around 1300. You may think that it looks large, like a village, but it was in fact just one large farm and a few houses. These were built, rebuilt, and added to by at least 12 generations of farmers. Walk down the steps now and stop when you've reached the gravelled area. Press the green button when you're ready to hear. If you now turn your back to the medieval farmhouse, you see the ruins of the Laird's house ahead of you. It's by far the tallest structure on the site, and the only one that would have been visible when the site was discovered in the late 1800s. This is no longer a Norse building. In 1469, Shetland came under Scottish rule, as part of a dowry following the marriage of James III of Scotland to Margaret, Princess of Norway and Denmark. Quickly, Scottish earls and farmers started to emigrate. The tall building you see in front of you dates from the early 1600s. But when Sir Walter Scott visited the site, some 200 years later, it already stood in ruins as it does today. To hear more about Walter Scott's interest in Jarlshof, enter 207, or to continue, press the green button.
So we've left this southern tip of the island and we've moved up to Scalloway, which is still very much a fishing port. And just do a quick panning round. Over to the right, where the yachts and the small boats are parked, is where we stayed when we were here about 14 years ago. Having had time to have a good look around Scalloway, I have to correct a statement I made earlier, and I've now found the pontoon that Terry and I stayed at whenever we came up to Shetland 14 years ago. This is the pontoon that leads up to the Scalloway Boating Club, and we were here for quite about 3 days, maybe three days before we headed south back to Bangor. Scalloway used to be the capital, I guess you'd call it, of Shetland from about 1600, whenever the castle was built. You can just see the remains of the castle. Oops, if I hold the camera steady, you can see the remains of the castle just at the far side. And it was the administrative centre for Shetland up until 1838, when it transferred to Lerwick, which was a fast growing town at the time. It's got a very well sheltered bay here for boats to come in. Since we were here, they've built this dock, protected dock, over to my right. Scalloway is where the Shetland bus used to operate from. Originally it operated from Lerwick, but then they brought it around to the west side of mainland Shetland and ran it from here because it was a little bit more secretive.